Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dojo Live. Today is Tuesday, August 24th, 2021. I'm Tulio Siragusa, broadcasting from Southern California. Today, I'm joined by Carlos Ponce in Cuernavaca, Mexico. Hi, Carlos. Welcome back.
Pleasure to be here as ever, Tulio.
And our guest is Harrison Tang, who is the co-founder and CEO at Spokeo, who is joining us from Los Angeles. Hi, Harrison. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Tulio. Hi, Carlos. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
All right. So here's a beautiful thing we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about data and privacy and how these two can they possibly coexist. But before we go and do that, let's get to know our guest a little bit. So if you could please introduce yourself, Harrison, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Harrison Tang, the CEO of Spokeo. Actually, my Twitter handle is the CEO Dad, so it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm the CEO, and at the same time, the dad of three little kids, 3, 5, and 7. So basically, the same guy doing two jobs. So pretty pretty busy all the time. Yeah.
One of them is a thankless job, but it's a labor of love, right?
Yeah,
so
I think, definitely have pros and cons, but net positive, I would say.
all right, great. Well, thanks for introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about Spokeo. What gave birth to this idea? You're one of the co-founders and the CEO. What gave birth to this idea? What was like that moment where you're sitting around with perhaps your co-founders like, I have an idea and this is something we ought to do. And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Spokeo is a leading people search engine that serves about 15 million unique visitors a month to search, connect, and know who they're dealing with. So we aggregate about 12 billion records into 600 million profiles so that people can make more informed, people-based decisions. Now, Spokeo is my first and only job so far. So I told people it's the best and worst job at that. So when I graduated from college and started this company, obviously, I had no clue about what people search is and all that stuff. So the original idea is actually a social network aggregator. At that time, Facebook wasn't the biggest social network. There was MySpace. Friendster is still very, very huge. So we thought there's an opportunity to actually aggregate all these social networks so that we can streamline people's digital lifestyle. So as people know, startup is a lot of twists and turns. So that's how we kind of started. And through multiple iterations and changes, we are now one of the leading people search, people intelligence service that serves tens of millions of people a month.
So who are the customers? Who uses your service?
So one of the things people don't realize is that 8% of searches online are first and last names. So most of us have searched for other person somewhere in the last month. And so there's a lot of use cases. And there are multiple ways to do what's called customer segmentation models. But at the top level, we group our use cases into two types. One is what we call connectors. So connectors are people looking to connect with other people, finding contact information, right? So for example, on the consumer side, finding long lost families and friends. That's what's called connector use case. On the B2B side, it will be helping businesses connect with their customers. So for example, sales. So that's what we call connector use case. The second one is what we call identity verification use case, protector use case. So protectors, they already know the person, but they are just trying to find what's called reference information to make sure people are who they say they are. So on the consumer side, let's say one famous blogger once said, "Spokeo before you date." So dating research is what we group under protector use case. And on the B2B side, obviously, identity verification, authentication, those kind of B2B use cases are under what we call protector use case. So essentially, we have thousands of use cases, but to cluster them at the top level is connectors and protectors.
Interesting. Okay, let's go right into the topic today and see what else we can learn. Carlos?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tulio. So, Tulio, today we're going to be answering one question that I'm sure will be of interest to a lot of the viewers out there, which is, can data and privacy coexist? And in order to answer that question, that's why our guest is going to tell us about, we're going to talk about the future of data revolution. Okay. So that's today's topic as chosen by our guest. First question that I have for you, Harrison, is why did you choose this particular topic for today's conversation, and why did you feel it was relevant for today's day and age? Let's start with that. Thank you.
So as we know, the data revolution has already happened. It empowers multiple different use cases, whether on the web world, whether it's personalization, right, marketing technologies, or self-driving cars, the impending revolution of self-driving cars. Those kind of things are all built on top of data. So data revolution has already happened. Now, at the same time, we have this cultural trend around privacy, right? Because data in the past decade has been a wild, wild west. People don't really know how it works. And when you don't know how it works, a lot of people assume that it's probably working in a different way, right? Like
Hmm.
not what they're expected. So there's a lot of conjectures and all those things, and then also in the past 3-4 years, there are a lot of laws, whether it's in the United States, EU, or across the globe, trying to uh, create what's called bill of rights for data, right? So there's two trends happening together, whether it's the data revolution, the data technology trends, or the privacy empowerment of user with their data. Those trends are converging, and that's why I think this is a very, very relevant topic for us to discuss, because the future of data is not less data. There will only be more data, not less. The future of data, I believe, is about transparency and control, right? So I think it's very, very interesting, not just interesting, but also relevant to all of us, how this data will evolve.
Interesting. Thank you, Harrison. Okay, couple of questions that are starting to twirl around my head is as follows. From let's call it from the normal, the average run of the mill average user. Okay, let's say that I'm just someone who's having conducting activities on the web. The first thing that I think of is my privacy, right? So I think privacy is in everybody's mind when it comes to doing anything on the web. So in that context, as a user, how would you say are the let's call it the aspects of privacy that we should all feel at ease? Okay, I know it's tempting and it's easy to talk about the potentially alarming stuff that we have a lot of that out there. So I want to go the other direction. What would you say to the users who might be watching regarding their privacy, so that we all feel at ease? So why don't we have to worry about, as it pertains to our sensitive items like our private information, that kind of thing? What measures are being taken towards that particular aspect of handling the data?
Sure. So since Spokeo is a data company, we like to start with definitions. I think a lot of people throw around the term privacy, but without really defining what privacy means. So
Right, right.
using sociology definitions, privacy is about selective levels of data access, basically selective access for data, right?
Hmm.
So with this kind of definitions, then I think the key thing is, how do you know, how is your data being used, right? Well, first of all, you actually
Right.
have to know what data is out there about you, and then you can know about how it's being used, right? So when we are
Hmm.
talking about controlling your privacy or controlling who you are, your identity online, I think the foundation of such control is actually transparency. You actually have to know what's out there, so that you can actually take some actions to it. And I think in regards to the transparency around data, I think the industry in general has made a lot of big leaps. Whether it's more clear, right, privacy policies, but also, right, because a lot of people don't read privacy policies, but make it more layman terms, right? And I think there's a bit of not just registrations, but also user experiences and more conversations, such as the one we're having right now, that will help users better understand what their identity data is about and how it's being used. So I think transparency is actually the very, very first step. And in regards to the advances of data transparency, I think in general, the industry has made some positive progress toward this direction.
Thank you.
It's very interesting, Harrison. I mean, if we just look at the past 25, 30 years, I mean, the guys at Peppers and Rogers were way ahead of the time, right? When they were predicting one-to-one marketing, the vehicle to achieve that was way before we even began to have big data and data science and the kind of massive amounts of volume we have today. But no one could have also predicted generationally the change that has happened, right? We're probably from a generation where privacy was a little bit more meaningful than some of the younger generations who live openly on Instagram, right? So their sense of privacy is a little different than mine. And I can appreciate the idea of transparency. So what's really sort of the driving force today? Is it more about collecting the data and bringing in the consumer and the user into understanding how that's being utilized to their benefit? And what is the effective way that companies are using to educate the consumers about that?
So first of all, you're right. Different people feel differently about privacy. So actually, the solution to privacy should not be black and white. It should be about personalization. So earlier, you mentioned about one of the biggest innovations in marketing technologies, which is personalization. That's probably the biggest trend, right, in the past decade. It's about how do we leverage data to personalize marketing for our users. Now, I think that trend is going to happen with data sharing as well. So in other words, I think data privacy, levels of data access and controls, I think personalization is going to be one of the big trends as well. Now, in regards to what the companies has been doing, right, to help in this regards, obviously there are certain things that is pushing the trends toward more transparency and privacy, whether it's the CCPA and now the version 2 of CCPA, CPRA, right, the California Privacy Act, or in the Europe GDPR. I think those things obviously forms the baseline to push companies forward. And also, I think there's some marketing forces as well, whether in the B2C market, direct to consumer market, whether it's antivirus software companies jumping into this market. And actually, Spokeo is building and testing an identity management and identity protection features as well. I think these kind of things and market forces combined with obviously legal regulations are going to be the driving force toward more data transparency and more data control.
What would you say also, there's trends that are happening, societal trends, for example, the cancel culture, right? It's become more important for people to protect certain kinds of information. I could just imagine if you're someone who's bent on being more conservative, you might not want to be so open about that, especially when the cancel culture is not in support of that, and it can impact your employment. So how is societal trends going to evolve in terms of the way people control what's being exposed about them, which ultimately will impact personalization, right? So how's that balance going to happen, you think? I know it's kind of all new to all of us, right? But what are you seeing as requirements for for the new kinds of privacy, which has nothing to do with information about you, where you live, and so on, but really like your beliefs and what you care about, and so on. Thoughts on that?
So first of all, privacy is personalized, and there's multiple dimensions to this personalization, right? So I'll name a couple. So right? Who you are, that's one of the dimensions of privacy, right? For example, I'm totally fine letting people know, or the world knows, I have three boys. Some people might not feel comfortable about that, right? So who it is, who's the subject of the data access sharing, that's one dimension. Okay, who you're sharing to, that's another dimension.
Yeah.
So I'm totally fine sharing my social security number with my wife and my family, totally fine with that. But then someone walking down the street, that might not be so smart, right? So who you're sharing to, what you're sharing, that's also another dimension. Now, time is also a very, very important dimension too, because how I feel about what kind of information to whom do I share right now can change over time. In other words, privacy is temporal. It's temporal. So to answer your question, we need to understand these dimensions, and we need to build a system, right, that help and facilitate the data sharings. And by the way, I think this is completely possible. If we can build recommendation engines that's for example, on YouTube and video streaming platforms, 70-80% of the clicks comes from recommendation engines. If we could build that, we can definitely build recommendation engines on what kind of data we're going to share. So I do believe that we need to recognize that privacy is personalized, and the solutions need to personalize as well. And I think technology can help with that.
Love it.
I have a question, Harrison. Not long ago, we had a conversation, a similar conversation with some from a gentleman. His name is Nick Jordan. The company is Narrative. The topic is it was data streaming at the end of the data broker model. Okay, so that was the topic back then. So I'm just thinking in those terms of data brokerages. What would you say that can be a good way, or a new disruptive way to remove the pain of buying and selling data when such is the case?
Well, first of all, I don't think data aggregation is going away, or data broker is going away. Okay, I heard some arguments saying that that data, the future of data is going to be first-party data. I think that's quite misinformed. In philosophy, identity is defined as attributes and characters that defines a distinct entity, and in this case, a distinct entity is a person, and such attributes and characters can come from first party, second party, and third party. So, for example, who I am should not just be who I say I am, right? Or who I am should not just be coming from one source. If a government says who I am, that defines who I am. We might as well just live in North Korea. Okay, let's just all move to North Korea, right? But
Gotcha.
who I am is actually not just defined by what we think we are, but also the environment we're living in. And the environments can be, whether it's third party, and that's the definition of third party, the environments can be other people, other entities, other business, and things like that. So for example, if I'm a Uber driver, my Uber driver score forms a part of my identity. So in other words, data, the future data is going to be multifaceted. By definition, in philosophy, your identity is multifaceted. Okay. And when you have a multifaceted and multi-source point of view of the world, having a need for aggregation or federation, right? Having a need for aggregation and federation is absolutely necessary. So I think data aggregation is not going away. It's going to evolve and change over time, obviously. But if you want a truth, right, a truth about who a person is, the truth about identity. Data aggregation is an absolutely needed layer for understanding what is true and what's not about a person.
All right. Thank you, Harrison.
That is so interesting. People have a version of themselves on social media. Sometimes it's the aspirational truth of who they want to be. Sometimes it's completely like not who they are. But it's the old thing, math and numbers never lie, right? Those are the things that are always factual. So the data is always going to tell the truth. Okay, so it sounds as though there's a lot of challenges ahead of us, a lot of layers to ensuring this kind of data, and there's different meanings to what privacy is for each individual. But the key cornerstone, if you're a data provider, is the transparency, is making sure that you're in partnership. This is what I'm hearing. I hope I'm hearing it correctly. Is having this partnership with the end user that's not about I have information on you that I sell. It's more about how would you like me to support your life with the kind of information that makes available. Is that how do you get people to opt in to participate in partnership with a company like yourself?
I think the key is about transparency, right? About the trade-offs, right? And then also, if you provide this data, what kind of benefits you're going to get from it. So I think the key is about transparency and ultimately about control. I think the reason why control goes after transparency is because, again, you need to know what's out there before you can control it. But also control and access management is actually a pretty tough topic. If I can go into hours around how do we build good access management and control, but there's a huge discipline around it. You need to have very good authentication service, authorization, audit, and all that stuff. So I think for us, at least on the Spokeo's perspective, we're focused on transparency first, right? But to answer your question, I think it's about transparency. It's about better education, about what kind of benefits you're going to get by sharing your data.
Excellent.
Harrison, we're about to approach the final segment of today's conversation, and I wouldn't want to end it without asking you specifically about the company itself in terms of what we call the company culture. How is a Spokeo to the inside in a way that you would say that would make others might come work for you, for example? What makes it an attractive or a meaningful place for others to even apply for a job if need be? Or how would you define the company culture as a whole? What is important for you?
Our mission is to make the world around us more transparent. So this idea of transparency, and our culture is consistent with our mission. So if I only could use one adjective to describe our culture, it's transparency. Now, transparency has multiple layers. The first layer and foundational layer is what I call information data transparency. And from the cultural perspective, I think Spokeo did a fantastic job at this. So we share all the numbers you can think of, whether it's revenue, subscriber numbers, cash flow, visitor counts, churn rates, anything you can think of with our entire team every single month. And then we have like weekly meetings where we share even more details. And everything at Spokeo, it's all transparent for everyone to see. So that's the first layer of transparency. The second layer is what I call contextual transparency. Spokeo has a lot of data, right? In Spokeo, we share everything. But then the next problem is, how do people know what information to find? So how do they have the proper context to know what is the right information or to interpret the information? For example, 10 is a very small number compared to 100, but it's 10 times bigger than 1, right? So how do you know whether this number is good or bad? How do you have the context? That's something that Spokeo is working on. And then the third layer is what we call knowledge transparency. And ultimately, on the philosophical level, is what we call epistemic transparency. So in philosophy, there's 4 pillars. There are logic, ethics, metaphysics, which is knowing what is true or not. The question of being, that's metaphysics. And epistemology is about knowing the how to know what is true or what's not. And that's basically the question that Spokeo is trying to answer, is to provide the tools and knowledge needed to know what is true or what's not. And that's what we call epistemic transparency. So there's multiple layer of transparency. But if you don't remember anything I said, and I can only use one word to describe our culture, is transparency.
All right, thank you so much.
It's a high order to achieve that, especially when people coming from a more traditional corporate structure that are more command and control. It's on a need to know basis. That still exists, unfortunately, today. So it's a big shift for a lot of people. I know, for example, in our own environment, we're freedom-based culture. So most of what we do when we onboard employees is basically try to uncondition some of the way of thinking. Instead of thinking, how do I impress the boss? It's more like, how do I participate as a team member and give it all I've got, the way a mature adult would do it. So have you guys found a process that works in when people come on board to your organization to adapt this transparency? Because it's not easy. It's a challenge to get people to be that open, right? What's been sort of the process for you guys culturally to help people make that transition? And what have you seen in terms of their productivity benefits from doing that?
So what we have done, again, the basics, especially during onboarding, is obviously very good documentations, right, across the board. So if the engineers on board, we not only have let's talk about data engineering. We not only have good data engineering documentations around our data architecture and things like that, but also there are documentations around web engineering, around design, around product, around marketing, around operations and things like that people have access to. So during our onboarding process, we will assign not just the hiring manager talk to the new team members, but we will also assign about 5 or 6 different functional experts so that they can actually connect with them in these different areas, right? Because you can say, hey, here's the documentation, here's the link, but it doesn't mean that, again, that's informational transparency, but that doesn't provide contextual transparency, right? So we also have assigned a person or experts to help walk through that process. So those are the basics that we have done. But ultimately, I think to enhance transparency, it's still a work in progress, right? You still need to, I always told my son, listening and comprehension, they always go together in name only, okay? They go together in name, but listening and reading is not the same thing as comprehension, right? So how do we actually make sure that our people listen and breathe? I think that's an ongoing challenge and ongoing exercise that we need to tackle. Yeah.
Well, I love the idea that new employees basically get their own tribe. They become part of a tribe of people that supports them. You can't do things alone. So, sounds like you've cracked the code, or at least are on your way to cracking the code to continue on that path. It's been a pleasure to have you, Harrison, as our guest. We've learned a lot about the true meaning of privacy. It's really about transparency, and it's a partnership with the end user and the companies providing that information with purpose behind it. And that's critically important to have all those things aligned. Thanks for being with us. Just stay with us for a few minutes as we go off the air. Before we do, Carlos, we've got one more show or 2 more shows this week. What do we got?
No, actually, we have 2 more shows, Julio. And tomorrow we're going to be speaking with, let's see, Eric Chebel, the founder and CEO of Chair. The topic is going to be shared home ownership, a faster way to build equity and access home ownership. And then on Thursday, the final show of the week is going to be with Govind Rangasamy, the CEO of Apranix. I don't have the topic yet for that one, but it should be as interesting as ever. So just stay tuned right here, folks, on Dojo Live at 12 p.m. Pacific. Just join us here and stay safe, everyone. And thanks, of course, to Harrison for having been with us today. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you.